Okay, not everything in bodybuilding is bad, obviously. I personally found bodybuilding and started competing when I was going through a depression. Bodybuilding was very much a part of what made me overcome this depression, so I owe a lot to it. That said, in this video, I want to talk about the parts that are not very much talked about, the parts that are not posted on social media. And if you don't know me, hi. I'm Eleni, IFBB Bikini Pro. Just a quick background on my bodybuilding career. I started competing in 2019. 2019, I competed at the regional level. In 2020, I started competing at the national level. And then 2021 was when I won my pro card and started competing in the professional level. And I want to start talking about the backstage reality and rivalry because I feel like that's something that it's not very much talked about out there. There is some reality in a competition and not everyone being very nice to you, especially for us women who, myself included, were trained or brainwashed into this female rivalry. I didn't always compete with a team, but when I did, I expected all the women in my team to be this big girls group that we supported each other. That was not my experience. Of course, there were many women that were very supportive and nice, but that wasn't always the case. I did feel a mean girl vibe from some of my other teammates, some mean or ill-intentioned comments here and there, and I felt like some people's demeanor changed depending on my placing with regards to their placing. So if I placed above them, they would act mean towards me, but when I placed under them, then they would all of a sudden be nice to me. So yeah, like I said, don't expect everybody to just suck, but just know that not everyone is just going to embrace you when you start competing. I think once I started competing in the pro league, I think that became even more evident. I think in the pro league, that's when we have the most evident battle of egos. There were some competitors at higher levels that wouldn't even look at our faces in the backstage, which is understandable when you're focusing for a competition and you don't want to get distracted. However, that demeanor carried on not only during the backstage, but in other parts of the event. I did have one instance where a very accomplished bodybuilder that I was competing with, she's been Miss Olympia more than once. It's not who you're thinking, so don't guess. But yeah, she won one of the shows that I was competing at, and I didn't place very well in the show, so I was asking for feedback to one of the judges. And during his feedback, she interrupted us. She didn't even look at my face. She just told him in a very dry manner that he needed to interview her. He asked her for a minute and kept giving me my feedback, so I do think that he also felt the mean girl vibe there. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Not everybody out there is going to be nice, right? Not all the competitors are going to be nice. And I think that extends outside of the bodybuilding world too. I do feel like many of our friends and family members are also not going to understand the changes in our lifestyle. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. The bodybuilding can be a lonely place, although it's also very rewarding at a personal level, but just something to keep in mind that you may not have all the support that you're expecting, and that's okay. As long as you have yourself, that's fine. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is the calorie restriction mindset. I grew up very skinny, so most of my fitness journey I was actually trying to gain weight, so I thought that I was not going to get affected by the cutting phase where you're restricting your calories, prepping for a competition, but I did. I think that's something that we have to be very careful about. I think we need to make sure that our minds are in a good place before we jump into a prep, because that can really mess with our hormones, it can mess with our minds. I've experienced thoughts that could maybe be the beginning of an eating disorder in the past. I've been going through therapy for a few years now, so I do feel like that helped, but yeah, definitely something for us to keep in mind before getting started. If you suffered with eating disorders in the past, you really need to make sure that you have the proper mental support before you get started, because it's a slippery slope, and I'm telling you that from experience. I've seen multiple competitors at the highest level is spreading some very toxic tips on social media, or just talking about what they do to achieve their bodies, which I think can be very dangerous, especially if young women are listening to this and thinking that that's how they're going to achieve this body. Be careful with what you see out there. Oftentimes, those bodies are not achieved through diet alone. But if you're thinking of getting it started, I highly, highly recommend you working on your mental health first and making sure that you're in a good place before you get started. If you have a job outside of bodybuilding, which I had, it can make it even more challenging because sometimes the calorie restriction of prep makes it hard for you to focus on work. Sometimes if you're in a calorie restriction, it's hard to find energy to do even the smallest of things. So definitely something to keep in mind. Another thing that I want to talk about that I think is very much linked to the calorie restriction is the body dysmorphia cycle. What I mean with that is that with bodybuilding, not only you have those thoughts that you're not skinny enough or that you're not lean enough, but you also have those thoughts that you're not big enough, that you are not muscular enough. That can be a very dangerous cycle to be at, always thinking that your body is not great or always thinking that your body can be improved. And there is some truth to it. None of us is perfect, so we always have things that we can improve. But when we are getting too much into our heads about it all the time, that's when it becomes toxic. Like I said, most of my fitness journey, I always felt like I was too skinny, that I needed to gain weight. And then when I started competing, I started having the opposite thoughts, thinking that I'm not lean enough. Going to the day of the competition, I would have issues with my weight dropping because once you start getting to those low numbers, your body starts holding back. So my weight wasn't dropping and I would just be looking at those numbers and feeling like I'm not lean enough. And when I look back at the photos, I was extremely lean. I was extremely skinny even, and I felt like I wasn't lean enough. And then on the very next day, I would feel like I wasn't big enough, that I wasn't muscular enough. So the same thing that I said before applies here. You want to make sure that you're in a good mental health state before you get started so you don't fall for that, because it's very easy for us to look to another person and say, this person is skinny, this person is muscular. But when it comes to ourselves, we are more judgmental and we can't really see things objectively. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. And if you have a support system that is able to help you see things objectively during your prep, that's even better. But like I said, not all of us has this support, right? So that's when, if you have the means, I highly recommend you seek for help from a therapist if those types of thoughts start arising. Don't let them pile up before you reach out for help. Another thing that I think is not very much discussed is the uncoachable trap, which is when you do everything your coach tells you because you're scared to be uncoachable, you're scared to be difficult. I fell for this trap. There were times where I felt like I was losing too much weight too fast, and when I look back, nobody knows our body better than ourselves, but I would still remain quiet. Sometimes I would question it once and then be quiet because I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want to be uncoachable. So I just follow the protocol no matter what. Trust the process, right? If you have a coach and you feel like you're doing the same, please stop. Please ask questions. If you feel like your coach doesn't have your best interest in mind, then maybe it's time to find a new coach. We have to find coaches that work with us and not really against us, because that's what's the most important thing in bodybuilding. To have somebody at your corner, it's a very vulnerable place to be in. Once your competition day is coming up, you become very vulnerable to pressure because you want to perform, you want to be looking your best, you don't want to be uncoachable. So make sure that your coach has your best interest in mind. And I'm not just talking about winning the competition, I'm also talking about your long-term health. Is your coach working with you on a reverse diet strategy? Do you feel like your coach is just limiting your calories too much, not really considering your health post show. Ask questions and make up your mind on what's best for you. Don't be worried about being uncoachable. That's what their coaches are there for, to work for you, not against you. I paid a high price for not listening to my own gut. It took me 8 months of reverse diet after one of my shows, just so my metabolism could go back to normal. So be careful, ask questions, and make sure that your coach has your best interest and your health in mind. And the last thing that I want to talk about is comparison and mental burnout. It's so hard for us to not compare ourselves when we're literally being compared on a stage. Seeing other women with an insane amount of muscle who are much taller than me, standing on the stage next to me, did mess with my head many times, where I just felt like I was inadequate, like I was an imposter on that stage. And I think here is where it's important to have somebody on our corner, again, to see things objectively, to tell us what we need to hear when we are under pressure and in a vulnerable place. It's very important to have a coach that'll say the right words. It's important to have a partner, a friend, and if you don't have anyone, it can get tough for you to not get into that comparison game. And if you fall for that trap, then that can lead to mental burnout very quickly. So yeah, definitely something to be aware of and to pay attention to when you're competing and when you're prepping for a competition. So yeah, I just wanted to make this short video to talk a little bit about my experience for other competitors out there or for new competitors. I'm super new to YouTube, so I'm open to feedback. If you have any suggestions on what you want to see next, just let me know. Thank you for watching this video and thank you for your support. See you next week.